it's a spoiler video about Wonder Woman. If you have not yet watched the movie, I suggest you go and watch it right now, or at the very least before you view this video. And if you like to live dangerously and want to continue watching it anyway, please be my guest. Go ahead. Consider this your spoiler warning. Okay? So, Wonder Woman. It is the most optimistic and most not to say light in tone, but it is the brightest of all the DCEU movies so far that we've had in the entire universe, and it marks a really big change from the tone that we saw in Batman v Superman and in Man of Steel. And I think that's for very, very good reasons, simply because unlike the other two, Wonder Woman is a completely different hero. In her genesis, in her origins, in her outlook, compared to Superman and compared to Batman, right? And this is a very important thing that people need to understand about the DCEU, because we've got people going around talking about how the DCEU is now finally saved because of Wonder Woman, and stuff like that, which completely misses the point of Wonder Woman in the first place, which is to put across the very, very clear idea that she is a completely and utterly different hero from Batman and Superman, and therefore it stands to reason that her movie, of course, would be different. You see, Diana Prince has always been the heart of the Justice League, in the sense that she has always provided its warmth more than anything. The Flash would provide the humor. Batman would provide the grittiness and all that, and Superman would provide the naivete or the optimism. But Diana always has that sense of justice, that sense of morality about her, when it comes to the Justice League. So it's played out in this movie. You get to see Diana's journey from this youngling, this waif of a child, that goes on to become the warrior princess that we all know and love. And that journey is very important in this movie because it highlights how that moral code comes about. You see that Diana is brought up to believe that there is good in the world of men, and that it is her duty as an Amazonian to safeguard that good and to bring men back into the light, so to speak. And the naivete that she displays, having that firm moral code which seems to clash with the world around her, it makes for some really great fish out of water moments throughout the movie. But thematically speaking, it also hints at the conflict that will come later on, that will actually cause Diana to withdraw from the world of men, and go on her almost 100-year exile before she shows up again in Batman v Superman to save the world from an extraterrestrial threat. And the thing is that we look at the movie, let's look at it as a whole, okay? We see Diana's journey from that of a young waif, of a child, all the way up to as full grown as an adult as you would expect an Amazonian to be, them being immortal and whatnot, right? And she's by far the most naive of all of the Amazonians. But we see during her journey during World War I, where she actually becomes, where that weariness, the seeds of the weariness that we see in Batman v Superman start to take hold. That's when they start growing. From the horrors of soldiers coming back from war and seeing them injured and everything, and all the way back, going on there from there to her moment, in No Man's Land, which we'll get to in a bit, right? And then seeing the wholesale slaughter of innocents in the village, and somehow then understanding the meaning of the perceived illusion of betrayal when she feels that Steve Trevor was the one that stopped her from stopping the village from being from all the villagers from being massacred, right? So she goes through all of these stages in a very compressed amount of time, and it's not a lot of time for the process, but she grows, she's still growing throughout that particular, the second half of the movie, until of course the big reveal at the end, where she finds out that there's no such thing as a sword called the God Killer. The God Killer is Diana herself, right? Where she assumes the mantle of Wonder Woman, and decides that her guiding principle, with Batman it's supposed to be vengeance, with Superman it's supposed to be hope, with Diana it's supposed to be love, right? And this make up the Trinity in DC Comics, in the Justice League. So the thing is that, there are lots of wonderful moments in this movie where you see flashes of the hero that Diana is supposed to be. And I think the best one was her reveal at the very beginning, at that sequence in No Man's Land, where she charges into battle. She looks to Steve, and tells Steve that, yes, this is not what you're here to do, it's what I'm here to do. Because she ain't gonna take no shit from no man. Yeah. And that's an amazing moment, because as a guy, who's watched lots of superhero movies over the years, there's never been this oh yeah moment for like a female superhero, and actually, I will be honest with you guys, I had tears in my eyes seeing that sequence of Diana, rushing across no man's land, deflecting bullets, deflecting mortars, and standing her ground against machine gun fire and all that. That entire sequence, all the way up to her freeing the town of Germans that were besieging it in World War I. That was amazing. It was an awesome sequence because we'd literally never seen that in cinema before. It was a watershed moment where there was this woman who was just kicking ass, and I was so on board for the whole thing, and I think this is very, very important because it showed that Diana, even though, just beforehand she was, looked like she was on the verge of tears. She was talking to the villagers. She was seeing that they were upset, the ones that were stranded on that side of the line. She was seeing their suffering and all that, and you could see her femininity, her emotions, right? She looked like she was on the verge of tears, but that did not weaken her. That's the important thing. If anything, that connection to her emotion empowered her to act, and this is a very important distinction that I think not just like, women should embrace as well, but men too. It's a very important facet of our characters, our emotions, and we should allow our emotions to empower us to act. And that was the message that I got from that first sequence, because if it wasn't for the fact that she was so in touch with how she was feeling and her earnestness, her sincerity, her desire to help, that whole sequence would not have happened, right? And Wonder Woman would not have actually emerged at all. And there's a lesson in there, isn't there? There's a lesson where, you can let your feelings do a lot of things to you. You can let your feelings hurt you. You can let your feelings control you. You can let your feelings do lots of things to you, right? And as men, we're taught from a young age to suppress these feelings. We're taught to ignore them. We're taught to push them aside and not consider them at all whenever we make our decisions, right? Because we've been taught from a very young age that having public displays of emotion of any kind would be considered weakness. And then you have this display of how emotion empowers you, how it gives you the strength to act. And that is a very, very, very important lesson for everybody on this planet. And if you haven't learned that lesson yet, you should have learned it by now, because it's proof, if anything, even if it's a fictional setting, even if it's just a movie, even if it's just another blockbuster from Hollywood, that there are realms of possibility where your emotions can do you some good. And that is a very important thread throughout the entire movie, where Diana acts upon her emotions, and they actually give her strength. And that could be something that could be applied to all of us as well, if we just allow it. If we allow these things to actually empower us, then they will empower us instead of handicapping us. And that's one thing that you notice with Wonder Woman throughout the entire movie. There is always that sense of gentleness, of kindness, of warmth, traits that are genuinely associated with women rather than with men, right? But you see in time, Steve Trevor, responds to this. Steve Trevor starts off as your very typical masculine hero. He's a wisecracker. He doesn't, he jokes as a defense mechanism. When we see him naked for the first time, and it's all these things that play into the very stereotypical image of what a man is supposed to be like. He doesn't show emotion. He uses lots of other things to cover up, things like his feelings and all. It cracks jokes. That's supposedly the manly way of being defensive. But as you see as the movie progresses, Steve's character develops as well. He becomes more receptive to feelings, when Diana asks him all these really earnest questions that he probably has never been asked before, and questions that most men don't have to deal with, about why things are the way they are in the world. And he questions the very idea, if not outright, in a very verbose manner, but at the very least in a subtle way, it's like what is masculinity? What is it? So what does it mean to be a man? And I love the fact that towards the end and all that, when Steve started showing more and more of his emotions and all that, and him, and he and Diana get closer and closer and feel more comfortable with one another, it was so organic, the way that their relationship developed, in the sense that they slowly opened up to each other, and Steve learned the value in being honest with his emotions as well. And that leads us to probably Steve's best line in the entire movie about, it's not about what, they deserve, it's about what you believe, right? Something that Steve himself was steadfast, by, when he quoted his father early on in the movie, saying that, you can either do something or you can do nothing, and I've already tried doing nothing, and regardless of what the consequences were, Steve was always going to try and do the right thing, and it was great that in that final moment just before before the finale and all that, before they split off for the final time, that Steve confessed his feelings to her, and she could only recall it later on after her mind had cleared, and her godly powers had manifested, that he loved her. And that was beautiful. It was a great sequence, that third act, not necessarily for the boss fight, the reveal with who Ares actually is and stuff like that, because actually those things were actually spoiled beforehand for me, with all of the gossip that was flying around the internet. So I knew who Ares was from the very beginning, right? That wasn't, I think, the whole point of it. People are going to say that the villain wasn't great, Ares was not properly fleshed out. That's a fair criticism, but Ares had some great lines about how he never actually had to corrupt humanity because humanity already had this darkness inside them, and Diana realizes the truth that yes, humans, men, are not perfect, and we never will be. We can try, but we never will be perfect. And that's a harsh lesson that she had to learn for herself. But we go back to Steve here, and his final words to Diana and his final sacrifice. And when that 20-second window, I think it's about 20 seconds, where Steve is about 20,000 feet in the air, in the clouds. He's got his gun ready. He's about to make the ultimate sacrifice. And in that little sequence there, you see the entire range of emotion that plays across his face, where in that final moment, Steve is honest about his feelings, about the whole situation with himself. And credit has to be given to Chris Pine, the actor, for what I can only say is a masterclass in facial expressions and acting. In that 20-second window, you see so many things happening. You see joy because the factory has been blown up. You see determination because he knows what he needs to do. You see fear there because of people on the brink of death. There must be that sort of fear right there. They must fear death at that moment in time. But then there comes acceptance about what he has to do. And that last tiny little bit, which was so subtle, I had to see it in the second time. That and regret, disappointment and regret, which we then have later on when we expand on it a little bit, when he says after he gives Diana his watch, I wish we had more time, and then he's gone, and then it cuts to this amazing scream of emotion from Diana, from Wonder Woman, where you could feel it. I don't think people are going to give Gal Gadot enough credit for her acting in this movie, but they should. They really, really should. I mean, she hasn't. Fair enough. Before this, all the other movies that we've seen with Gal in them, other than Batman v Superman, that we haven't really seen much of a range. I mean, the Fast and Furious movies, well, they're Fast and Furious, so no chance to show any range. But here, that moment where she lets out this primordial scream of grief, interspersed with anger and all that, and her godly powers finally manifest, and then she just goes in this berserker rage and just starts mowing down German soldiers left and right before she has her final confrontation with Ares. That was incredibly moving, and that was, I think, the second time that I cried in the movie. Because again, it was a situation where her emotions, she let them out, she let them show, and her emotions empowered her. Yes, she had that grief. Yes, she had that pain, that suffering that went through her, but it empowered her. I think that's the subtle message that the whole movie is trying to put across, that your emotions can be used to do more than to just hurt you. Even negative emotions like this, they can be used in a good way. They can be used to give you strength, and that's where Diana drew her strength from. And ultimately she chose, above all of the emotions that she was feeling, she chose her powers to manifest in the form of love, which is, the more cynical among you will think, yeah, that's incredibly cheesy. Yes, it is. It is cheesy. It is corny. It's cheesy and corny because you've been conditioned to think that stuff like this is lame. That love is not supposed to be this unifying or this empowering force that gives you strength, that gives you the willpower to face anything. Yeah, but it can. It can. And you should allow it to, as it allowed Wonder Woman to. That was her choice, to let it empower her. Right? And it's a lesson, I think, that not just, again, we go back to this, how this is something that all of us should take note of, men and women, that there's nothing wrong with emotions. You should embrace them. Embrace them and let them give you strength. Because to not be in touch with your emotions is to try and become a robot. And what could be less human than being a robot? And yeah, so the whole movie, I felt, was like it's almost as if it was daring you to actually allow yourself to feel, and like I felt a lot, with all of the battle sequences with Wonder Woman, I teared up, there are stories all over the internet of women actually crying during screenings of Wonder Woman because they never knew that they needed to see this, I never knew I needed to see this, when I saw all of these things happening on screen, and of course, with the death of Steve at the end, you sort of, I think it was sort of ordained that was going to happen, right? Like the moment you realize that someone has to fly that plane and no one else in that little motley crew is a pilot, then Steve has to be the one to make the sacrifice. And the immensely gratifying thing about how the whole sequence was shot was that Patty Jenkins, even though you knew that what was coming, the way that it was edited together, the way that it was shot, the way that Diana, released all of that emotion, the way that Steve released all of his emotion in his final moments, made sure that moment was beyond reproach in terms of cliche, and that was awesome. Right. And so we go into the ties between this movie and all of the other movies in the DCEU. There's no direct link to Suicide Squad, I think. I don't think you can say that because Suicide Squad is actually the latest movie in the entire timeline, so there's no direct link to the Suicide Squad. But there are some pretty interesting connections to Batman v Superman, right? Specifically where, the first Easter egg, of course, is when Lex is talking about Zeus hurling thunderbolts from the sky, and how Perseus sided with the humans and whatnot. And Diana rolling her eyes because she knows that that's not true, that's not the real story of Zeus, okay? And then you have the bit where... I think there are other Easter eggs, but I think these are the two most important ones. One was, of course, the mention of Zeus in by Lex Luthor. The other was the bit where Superman died at the end of Batman v Superman, and I think it was summed up in a very nice meme that I saw on a Facebook page, Superman v Batman, Superman versus Batman. That's a Facebook page. Look it up. Put it in the link below, where as Lois Lane is cradling Superman, is cradling Kal-El, you know, after he died, the one thing that Wonder Woman did was look up to the sky, because that's where she last saw her loved one, the one and only man that she has ever loved, and then we cut back to the picture that Lex Luthor had of Diana, and how in the movie, in Wonder Woman, we see the actual glass photograph. We see the photo being taken in the movie, and we see the glass photograph being shown in the beginning and at the end of Wonder Woman. And we're wondering, at first in Batman v Superman, we think, okay, she wants the photograph because she wants to hide evidence of her immortality, which is fair, I think, because that kind of stuff would probably not go down very well in the real world, as look at what happened to Superman in Batman v Superman, like how humans reacted to him, the amount of xenophobia that he had to deal with, the doubt and suspicion and the hate, the unfounded hate that he had to deal with. Imagine if people had found that out about Wonder Woman, about Diana Prince. But then we realized that that's not the reason at all why she wanted the photograph, because apart from the watch, she has literally nothing else of Steve. Nothing. Just the watch and a whole bunch of memories, and lines spoken nearly a century earlier, grounding her in her moral code. And of course, when she writes a note to Bruce saying, when she writes the email to Bruce saying, "Thank you for bringing him back to me," it's literally having the ghost of Christmas past come back, not to haunt you, but to comfort you. And you can see in those final moments in the movie where she manages to see Steve's face again, that the Wonder Woman that leaps into battle at the end of the movie is the Wonder Woman that resembles the first one that actually went into battle in the beginning, in the middle of the movie, the first time that she appears in No Man's Land. Not like the Wonder Woman that is battle-hardened and weary and slightly cynical that you see in Batman v Superman. Because it seems as though that having that memory has brought, Diana back into the light herself, right? So why did she step away from mankind for an entire century? I can only surmise and speculate that the reason why she did that was because after World War I and she lost her love and she just withdrew from public life, she wouldn't have known how to navigate her way back to Themyscira, because Themyscira is, enchanted island that's covered in magic and you can't find it anywhere, because she slept through the boat journey, so she didn't know what the landmarks were and everything to get her back. So she probably lost Themyscira, right? And so she only had her 3 other companions, the Scotsman, the Native American, and the Frenchman as company. And eventually they would have died as well. Maybe they died in World War II. And with Ares gone and World War II happening anyway, then that would be when Diana realized that men are equally capable, without Ares' prompting, of creating horrors upon themselves. And that's why she made the decision to just step back and let humanity run its course. Because, yes, her only purpose in life up to that point in the movie was to defeat Ares, and she'd already done that. What else could she do? How is she supposed to protect all of mankind? She might be the daughter of a goddess, of a god, and a goddess herself, right? But then there are limits to that power, are there not? And those powers that she manifested and all, we never saw them in Batman v Superman. We saw her flying in Wonder Woman, but we never saw her flying in Batman v Superman, right? But the implication is at the end of the Wonder Woman movie is that she can actually fly now, right? Which is one of the powers that she has in the animated movies. And so the return of Steve into her life, even if it's just as a photograph, may actually help her manifest her powers even more. The full range of her capabilities might now finally be available to her again. So yeah. So what did you guys think of Wonder Woman? Just let me know in the comments. Did you love it? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you loathe it? Zack Snyder haters need not apply, simply because if there's a reminder that you guys need to have, is that Zack Snyder has a story credit on this, and that it was always the intention of the DCEU people to actually have Wonder Woman stand apart from the other heroes in the Justice League. So you know what? This is completely intentional. There is no course correction or course change for the DC extended universe. This has always been what it's supposed to be like, and yeah, I can't wait for Justice League. I can't wait to see that Diana back, the one that we saw towards the middle of the Wonder Woman movie, the first emergence of Diana as a superhero. I can't wait to see that Diana back in action in the Justice League. So yeah, guys, just leave me some comments below. Let me know what you think. I'll drop any of the relevant links that I mentioned. I'll put them in the description below. That's it from me. Peace out.